Okay. Let's put this up. Are you in the Hangout? Oh, okay. Oh, maybe you can't access it yet. Okay. Okay. And now you have the PowerPoint presentation? All right, cool. And then now I can hear myself over your computer. What was I going to say? So I'm trying to think. I'm not going to, since I have this screen up, I'm not going to see any of the chat going on or any of the, although let's see if I can adjust this or if there's any questions that come in. Oops. Well, I don't know if you can see my screen now, but on the right side, I've got group chat, which I assume means anyone that's been invited can type in there and see in there. But do you see it on your screen? No, I don't see anything. Did you push enter? Huh. Let me see. Yeah, now I'm on the just on the Hangout screen. Okay. Did you see what I just wrote? Did you see what I just wrote in the chat box? I wonder, were you writing in the, here, okay, so you were writing in the comments to the video. You wrote, hi, can you see this, right? Okay, so I think you're looking at the YouTube screen as opposed to the Google Hangout screen, which is where there's a group chat. And that's probably because of the link that you originally had. But now that I invited you, so you probably have an email with an invitation to the Hangout. I would probably close yourself out of the other one. But it's good to know that the YouTube one works. All right, now I can see you.
I forgot it was going to be visible. I can't wear. Can you see my partisan sweatshirt?
I just see that it's green. I don't see below your neck. Brilliant. So I'm gonna mute everyone on the
Okay.
And what's this? Hide participants. Do you think I need to hide the participants or not? I think it's fine, right? To hide the participants, because presumably as more people join, there'll be little boxes that'll appear with their videos. Okay. No one's going to be wearing any propaganda. No one's going to be wearing any propaganda t-shirts or hats. Right. Okay. So just out of curiosity, now I'm sharing my screen. What do you see on your screen? Right. But do you also see all this other stuff around it, like the Google Hangout stuff? Like the, yeah. Okay. All right. So, and then if I switch over to here, oops. Do you just see like the PowerPoint basically? But is it your frame or my frame? Huh. That's funny because I don't see my frame. Or I don't, okay. Uh, oh, huh. All right. Well, is the PowerPoint legible? Let me scroll forward to one that's like, can you read the smaller type on this? Yeah. Can you read the smaller type on this slide? Okay, but you can read it? Oh, no, no, I moved forward. I think there's a bit of delay on the video. That's what's going on. Let me know when you see that I've moved forward in the slides. Huh. Okay. I'm leaving my PowerPoint open to not mess with it. Oh, now I hear you on the computer. Is there someone? Hi, who just joined? Mary, how are you? It's Marianne. Hopefully, it looks like we're still working out a few kinks. Dan, were you able to reload? Yeah. Um, let's see. Whoops. Oh, it looks like we have 5 viewers on the YouTube channel too for this streaming. All right. I assume that they can hear us. So apologies for the technical difficulties that you guys are experiencing. Let me see if we can see you guys in the... Dan, do you have me on your computer and on the phone? Yep. So let me mute everyone on... Ooh, how do I do this? I don't know how to do this. If there's anyone that's joining us both via the live stream and on the phone, if you guys could please mute the computer, because there's a little bit of a delay. And it sounds like you guys took care of that. Thank you. Yeah, sure. And maybe should we let them know about other technical options just in case? Perhaps both, yes.
Okay, so welcome everyone to the Peace Alliance's Writers Team Workshop on Peacebuilding Journalism. We're very pleased that you could make it, and for those of you who experience any technical difficulties, we want to let you know that there's also a dial-in number that you can use, which might be simpler technology than the video chat. So if you're having difficulty with your video chat, then you can call 712-432-0175. Again, that's 712-432-0175. And welcome. And the conference call code is 240313. I'll tell you one more time. It's 712-432-0175, and the code is 240313. My name is Dan Kahn. I'm the National Field Director for the Peace Alliance. And before I introduce Marianne, I have a few quick announcements. We're currently just 13 days away from Mother's Day. 2016. So there is plenty of time now to plan to visit the local offices of your members of Congress for the Mother's Day Piece of the Pie campaign. You can bring news about peace building policies, and you can bring a gift of pie. And you can read all about this action and find helpful materials on our website at www.peacealliance.org. If you just scroll down a little bit on the homepage, you'll find the Mother's Day Piece of the Pie action. And if you want to have a quick opportunity to engage in some peace-building journalism, you can take this Mother's Day action as an opportunity to generate some positive media publicity. There is an op-ed template available on the writers team page of Do Peace. That's dopeace.us. Okay, and you can go to the writers team under Do Peace. And then under op-ed templates, you'll find guidance on how to craft an opinion piece for your local paper that'll share the news that peace is powerful and practical and readily available through some policy options that are in the US Congress right now. I know that's a fair amount of information. If you have any questions about any of this, please feel free to contact me directly. That's dan@peacealliance.org. Okay, now without further ado, it is really my pleasure to introduce the presenter for this workshop. And we are so fortunate that within our Peace Alliance writers team, there is a creative, talented, and dedicated peace-building writer and scholar, such as Marianne Perez de Fransius. Marianne attended Georgetown School of Foreign Service and received her master's in Peace and Conflict Studies from the European Peace University. She wrote her master's thesis on moving mainstream media towards a culture of peace. Her article, Peace Journalism Case Study, U.S. Media Coverage of the Iraq War, was the first article about peace journalism to be published in the prestigious academic peer-reviewed journal entitled Journalism. She's currently based in Mozambique, where she's authoring a book chapter on the state of peace journalism there. Having founded the Peace is Sexy blog 3 years ago, Marianne is now fictionalizing the stories collected there and turning them into a PeaceSuperheroes digital game. So you see what I mean when I say we are really lucky to have such a dedicated and creative person in our midst. And it's my pleasure to introduce her here this evening. So welcome, Marianne.
Thank you very much, Dan, for a lovely introduction. And since I'm a little worried about our technical difficulties, I'm wondering if you'd actually be able to email the PowerPoint to the people who have RSVP'd. So that way, if they're following on the phone or for some reason the technical stuff isn't working on the video, that they can at least follow through with a PowerPoint.
Great idea. I'll be glad to do that. I'll do that right away.
All right, cool. So welcome everybody to the Peace Journalism Training for the Peace Alliance Writers Team. As Dan mentioned, actually what Dan didn't mention is that I'm currently living in Mozambique, although right this minute, I'm actually in New York visiting family. But I was for a long time involved in New Yorkers for Department of Peace. And so if you can see the second slide here, it's a picture of a bunch of us from New Yorkers for Department of Peace down in DC in front of the Capitol. I'm the one with the red hat. Doing one of our lobbying campaigns. This must have been 8 or 9 years ago already. And I've done, I don't know how many of those DC conferences, at least 4 or 5 of those conferences. And part of the reason, or I guess Dan mentioned that I did my master's degree at the European Peace University in Austria. And after that, I actually thought that I was going to be staying in Europe because I left the US right after September 11th, after about 8 months after, once I finished my undergrad degree, which I did in DC. And part of the reason that I left the US was because of the media, and because I found the media to be so vitriolic and so hateful, particularly towards Muslims, but in general, that I couldn't stand it. And since I have multiple passports, I had the luxury of being able to easily leave the country and move someplace else. There might be some people who who are wishing that they could do that soon, depending on the outcome of the elections or different things that happen. But I actually did it. But part of the reason I actually moved back to the US was probably the major reason, actually, definitely the major reason I moved back to the US was because of the Peace Alliance. And because when I came back in 2005, so 4 years after September 11th, I saw that there was a different conversationing that was starting to happen. And it was fueled, at least the contact that I had was through the Peace Alliance. And I found people who had a similar worldview and wanted the same things that I did. And so I ended up staying in New York from 2005 until 2012. And then I got married to a Swedish diplomat and moved abroad and lived in Sweden, and now I'm living in Mozambique. But I still subscribe to the Peace Alliance newsletters, and I get all the emails and everything and all the information. And it's actually one of the few emails that if I don't have time to read through it, but I see that there's a petition or an action that needs to be taken, that I do it right away, because I trust the approach that the Peace Alliance has in terms of peace building and in terms of communicating about peace building. So I think that's to all your credit, because the Peace Alliance wouldn't be what it is without the participation of course, of the staff, but also of all the members and the participants who are taking the message of the Peace Alliance and the Department of Peace Building and the Youth Promise Act and nonviolent communication and all the types of programs that that the Peace Alliance supports out into the communities and really helping to change the conversation across the country. So my hat goes off to all of you, and I'm enjoying the opportunity to share a little bit of my passion with you. So for those of you who are following along, I'm going to click to the next slide, which is a picture from the European Peace University. And in this picture, I'm in a green outfit. Dan, I don't know, can you confirm whether or not you can see this picture, or are you still stuck on the first slide?
I'm still looking at the first slide.
Yeah. Or is there anyone that's on the phone who can confirm which slide you guys are looking at, if any? Yes. Huh. Okay. All right. So you're still on the title slide on YouTube. Okay. All right. Well, I hope that the PowerPoint is coming through by email shortly, and that you guys can see the pictures that I'm sharing. But I'll describe the picture for those of you who can't see it. So it's actually quite a fun picture, because in the forefront there's a guy that's dancing. Everybody in the picture looks like they're having a great time, and there's a guy that's dancing. He kind of looks like he's dancing like a frog or something. And so he's actually Muhammad, and he's Egyptian. And then behind him, there's a bunch of women that are laughing at how ridiculous the whole situation is. And so there's Ying from Thailand, Dilara from Bangladesh, myself from the US, but also France and also Brazil, and then my friend Hanayo, who's Japanese. And this is what peace is to me. It is people from different backgrounds, from all over the world, with different religious beliefs and different approaches, able to connect to each other and able to connect across their differences. And so you can see Dilara is, she's got a headscarf and she's pretty covered, whereas Ying is showing a little bit more skin. but we all just got along, and we're able to connect despite our cultures and despite different ages and different experiences and different backgrounds. And so this peace program, so it was a master's degree in peace studies, where we're all living in the same house. There were about 40 students from 25 different countries living all under one roof. We all went to class together, the same classes, and then we all had one kitchen with 8 burners that we had to share and figure out how to cook breakfast, lunch, and dinner around, and common areas and all that stuff. And so it was really collaboration in action. And it's very much this sense of peace that I try to bring to people, because it was so much fun, and the peace to me is fun, and it's attractive, and it's a good time, and it's sexy, which is why I named my website Peace is Sexy. So I'm going to flip to the next slide, which is my master's thesis. So at EPU, I wrote my master's thesis, and it was called Moving Mainstream Media Towards a Culture of Peace. There's the link here in case anyone wants to access it. And basically what I did in my master's thesis is I looked at the Iraq War and how it was covered in the US mainstream media. But part of what I did, which is relevant to this group, is that I actually looked at how a lot of the media coverage was driven. So this was in 2004, 2005 is when I did the media analysis, and how a lot of that media coverage was driven by the Department of Defense, and that there was a lot of militaristic language and competition and fear and security that was driving the public conversation, or the conversation that was going on in the media about what should be done in Iraq and the war in Iraq. And then I contrasted that with, and I did a peace journalism approach, an analysis to it, and then I contrasted that with, if we had a Department of Peace, here's how the Department of Peace could anchor that conversation, and show these alternatives, and take a stand for diplomacy, take a stand for negotiations, take a stand for more collaborative approaches as opposed to invading and bombing, and not having a clear plan. And we all know now in hindsight that Iraq didn't turn out the way anyone had wanted it to turn out. But there are probably a few people who wanted it to turn out this way and are benefiting from it. But by and large, Iraq, the U.S. invasion of Iraq, is seen as a mistake. And if you do this analysis, or if it was very obvious to me just from doing the media analysis. So there's a couple chapters in my master's thesis about a Department of Peace and how the Department of Peace could anchor a public conversation around peace building. So basically what I'm going to do in this training is take you through what kind of the ideological framework of my master's thesis, which is a quick introduction to Johan Galtung, who's one of the founders of peace studies, and how he looks at the world. And he talks about a peace discourse and a security discourse. And then mapping over that, George Lakoff, who some of you might remember from the Howard Dean campaign, whenever Howard Dean ran, 8 or 12 years ago. And his book, 12 years ago, Don't Think of an Elephant. And he's a neurolinguist, and so his analysis about language and framing discussions. And then I'm going to kind of weave in some nonviolent communication, which I think a lot of you have some familiarity with, because I know the Peace Alliance offers nonviolent communication training to members and promotes it. And I'm going to tie it all up into an example for a Mother's Day little piece of writing. And at the end, I hope that we'll be able to get questions across all our communications channels, whichever they may be. So you feel free to hop onto the phone line if that might be easier to ask questions, but I'll also try and check the different chat options too. So let's jump in. So this is Johan Galtung. He was one of our professors at the European Peace University. He's a Norwegian scholar, and he's trained actually as a mathematician. He's about 75 or 80 years old now. And he's widely considered to be the one of the founding fathers of peace studies, and to actually have incorporated peace studies as an academic field. And he, since he's a mathematician, he has a very kind of linear, logical ways of thinking of things. And so one of his concepts is that there is a security discourse and a peace discourse. So he sees a security discourse, which is basically how people talk about issues, and largely applicable to political or military issues, but you could also see it in other types of conversations too. And so basically, according to Galtung, the security discourse says that there's an evil party with strong capabilities and evil intentions. So we see this a lot with, like, for example, with ISIS right now. The conversation about ISIS is that they're evil, that they're strong, and they have evil intentions. They want to attack innocent civilians, and they're causing terror in Brussels and in Paris and in different parts of the world. And because there was a clear and present danger of, and there is a clear and present danger of violence, as being argued by these terrorist attacks, and it could be either real or potential. So for example, we have all this TSA security to go through because it's supposed to deter all these potential terror threats. And we need to use strength to defeat or deter the evil party. So we have to go and invade or send more troops to Syria, send more troops to Iraq, strengthen the Afghan police. So use strength and power to defeat this evil party, so that we can have security. And security is seen as the best approach to peace. And security here is used in a kind of in a militaristic sense, as opposed to more of a nonviolent communication sense. And so this approach works best when evil parties are weakened through defeat or deterrence, and or converted into good parties. This is what happened during World War II. We defeated Hitler. We deterred the Japanese by bombing them into submission. And then both the Germans and the Japanese are now strong allies of the US. So obviously this system works. And so he contrasts this with the peace discourse, which he sees as more horizontal. And so the peace discourse sees that there's unresolved or untransformed conflict, and that violence is only one way to settle conflict. And so conflict and violence are not necessarily equal. The conflict is a difference of opinions, a difference of strategies, a perceived difference in competition, and that you can address this conflict with violence, but you could also address it in nonviolent ways, through conversation, through dialogue, through negotiation, through chants, and the violence doesn't necessarily have to be part of the picture. And then there are empathetic, creative, and nonviolent ways to transform conflict, and that produces peace. and peace is the best approach to security. So it's the inverse of the previous one. So that peace leads to security rather than security leading to peace. And this approach works through acceptable or sustainable outcomes. So obviously, I see the world through the peace discourse and the peace discourse lens. I assume that most of you, as participants in the Peace Alliance, share that view. And so this is very similar, and I talk a lot about this in my master's thesis, to what George Lakoff discusses in this book, Don't Think of an Elephant, in which he discusses framing. So for those of you who haven't read it or haven't read it in a while, he kind of breaks down the world into a kind of dichotomous two worldviews. And those are the strict father frame and the nurturant parent frame. So basically, the strict father frame overlays onto Johann Galtung's security discourse. So the world is dangerous and difficult. Children, and so he uses more, Lakoff uses more of a family metaphor. Children are born bad and must be made good. The father is the moral authority, and so he has to support and defend the family, and he tells everybody what to do, and he has to impose what is right and what is wrong. And that's done through punishment, could be through physical discipline, which leads to internal self-discipline, and is all about morality and survival. And everybody is supposed to be independent, pursue their best interest, and be self-reliant. And then any kind of social government programs are too cushy, and they spoil people and don't give them what they earn. The role of the government is to protect the nation, to maintain order, to administer justice. So you can see he kind of sees the government paralleling the role of this authoritative father figure. And then business is how disciplined people become successful. And taxes take away from good, disciplined people what they've rightfully earned. And so he talks about, well, we'll get into the tax discussion later. And basically, foreign policy is meant to maintain sovereignty and impose moral authority. So there's a lot of morality in this. And then the trigger that's driving all of this, the strict father frame, is fear. And then he contrasts that with a nurturant parent frame, which means that the world is basically good and can be made better. There's shared responsibility between the parents for raising the children, and that they are nurturing, that they raise their kids with empathy, and responsibility, and so that they are teaching their children to take care of themselves and to take care of others. And the political values that are associated with this are based on empathy. So it's protection from harm, the fulfillment of life, fairness, freedom, open communication, which also translates, and then there's political values based on responsibility, which include competence, trust, commitment, and community building. And this translates into social programs and social safety nets, that there's universal education, civil liberties are protected, there's equal treatment and accountability, and open government. And the economy and business are meant to benefit all and promote these values. And the government is supposed to act as a agent for providing infrastructure and services to perpetuate these values. And foreign policy is based on cooperation and diplomacy, and the idea is to extend these values to the world. So you can see how the strict father frame echoes Johann Galtung's security discourse, and the nurturant parent frame overlays pretty squarely onto the peace discourse of Johann Galtung. And so both of these actually kind of come together in peace journalism. And this is kind of the slide. I don't know who can see it anymore, but it's a picture of the book cover of a book called Peace Journalism, written by Jake Lynch and Annabelle McGoldrick. Jake used to be a reporter at the BBC and at Sky News in England, and basically he saw Johan Galtung's ideas about peace studies and conflict analysis, and Johan Galtung had actually come up with a framework for how to apply that to media and journalism specifically. But Jake Lynch is the one who really took it and developed it into a practice, and so that now there are the field of peace journalism is actually increasing in its own right, and there's actually at Park University, which I think is in Missouri, now there's a whole center for peace journalism. They put out a biannual newsletter called the Peace Journalist, and it's turning into its own academic field. So if anyone is interested in any of this, I definitely recommend you pick up this peace journalism textbook, which is actually one of my favorite books, even though it is a textbook, just because it's a really interesting approach and it's very practical. And it's written for journalism and journalists and journalism students. But if for anyone that's interested in media and how to approach the media, it's a great handbook, and it's available on Amazon. I just ordered like my 4th copy of it because I keep buying it and then sharing it with people, and then they don't return it, and I never know who I lent it to. so I just bought another copy, and I'd rather that other people read it than be trying to keep my original copies. So when you apply all these ideas to journalism, you have peace journalism and war journalism, or violence-oriented journalism. And in the peace journalism point of view, basically, I'll start with a war journalism, because that'll be easier because that's more of what we see. So basically, you have 2 parties, a good guy and a bad guy. A story is written about a good guy and a bad guy. They have one goal, which is to win the war, win whatever it is. It's a very us versus them journalism, and the them is a very dehumanizing. So a lot of the coverage of ISIS, not most of the coverage of ISIS right now, in major US mainstream news outlets is like this. It's we're the good guys, ISIS are the bad guys. They're decapitating people and bombing and doing all this horrible stuff, and they are totally horrible people. And it's very reactive. So it's only like once there's a terror attack or once there's something that's happened that we're even going to pay attention to these people. And then it's very propaganda oriented. So this type of journalism is always trying to show how they are wrong, and expose their untruths. And it kind of glosses over our cover-ups, or the good guys cover-ups. And then it is also very elite oriented, so that it focuses on our victims, our soldiers and our heroes, focuses on what our leaders are saying and our leaders are doing, but not looking at what is going on a few levels below. And then it's always also very victory oriented. And so peace in a war journalism perspective is seen as victory plus ceasefire. Excuse me, let me get a drink of water here. And on the peace journalism side, we see multiple parties, and so it's not just a good guy and a bad guy, but that there are usually more people or more parties that are involved in the conflict. and it gives voice to everyone, not just the good guys. And it works to humanize all sides, and it tends to be proactive. This is ideally what peace journalism would do. And it looks at truths, or tries to expose untruths on all sides and uncover all cover-ups. So instead of falling into a trap, let's say about a whistleblower, and making a big deal about what if the whistleblower should go to jail or not, looking at, well, what is it that the whistleblower is trying to bring attention to, and are these issues things that need to be paid attention to, and how can we constructively address the issues that a whistleblower is bringing to light. And then it tends to be people-oriented. So it focuses on all victims, not just the soldiers or the elite, but also the women, the aged, the children, and focuses not just on the victims, but also on the grassroots movements for peace, and what are people peacemakers doing, and what ideas do they have about how to transform the conflict. And finally, peace journalism tends to be very solutions oriented, so it sees peace as nonviolence plus creativity, and looks at different options and solicits different options for transforming conflict, and opens a conversation about it. So, so my master's thesis, I kind of went into a whole analysis, again, in terms of the war in Iraq, the invasion of the U.S. invasion of Iraq, and what would have happened if Cindy Sheehan and these just Muslim women's groups, and I can't remember who else I analyzed, but what would have happened if these people's ideas had been taken seriously? What would have happened if we would have listened to these voices for their peace proposals? There's actually one incident that I had uncovered, in which I think it was a European diplomat who had transmitted a letter from Saddam Hussein, and Saddam Hussein actually was giving in, or was making a lot of concessions, and this is, I guess, at the beginning of March, or maybe in February 2003, and he was making a lot of concessions that the U.S. was asking for. In turn, he was saying, if you want Iraqi oil, you can have it. You can have access to it. He wasn't even asking for any kind of percentage of the profits or anything. And that letter was just totally dismissed, and it wasn't given. It was published in the New York Times on page 6 or 8, but was such a drop in the bucket because of all the war journalism that was going on, that it seemed so ridiculous and incredible, as in not credible, that these kinds of concessions could be made, and it just didn't seem serious, and so it was totally ignored. But what would have happened if there'd been serious coverage about this letter that Saddam Hussein had written, and that he had been willing to make all these concessions, and how different would our position be now, 13 years later, vis-a-vis Iraq? So, and in fact, the whole Middle East. So, of course, I think that peace journalism should be strengthened, and there should be more of it, to prevent these kinds of situations. So what I've done is there's a lot of resources on the Peace Alliance website, which I encourage you all to take a look at if you haven't taken a look at them recently. And one of the things that I found was this template, or this little approach called Laser Talks, which looks like it's a template that Results USA and Common Cause use, but have made available for the Peace Alliance. And so basically their approach is to focus on a problem, then identify a solution, to make it real, and then to have a specific request or a call to action at the end. And so I'll take you through how we can use these laser talks with the peace journalism framework in mind. So step one is the problem. So choose some data to highlight the issue or the problem. Local data is especially powerful. I will add that there is annually updated data that's available from the Global Peace Index and the US Peace Index. I went through the data and statistics that are available on the Peace Alliance website. And Dan, you can pass this on to whoever's in charge of it, Dan and Lori. But those statistics, I think the most recent one is from 2012, or maybe 2013. So they need a little bit of updating. But there is a lot of stuff on the Global Peace Index, and then the US Peace Index, and they've, I think, just released a terrorism index, and there's also a Mexico Peace Index. There's a couple other indices, and this is all on the Vision of Humanity website, visionofhumanity.org. But if you Google Global Peace Index or US Peace Index, you'll find it. And so they've got all kinds of data about how much is spent on police, how much is spent on prisons, how much is spent on like kind of the whole security apparatus, and you can compare it very easily to how much is spent on education, on different types of peace building measures, and it's pretty easy to manipulate. And now because they have the US Peace Index, you can actually get pretty granular information by state, which is really great and really interesting, and definitely a great resource. So, for example, if you were doing a laser talk or a laser piece of writing, you could go and find in the Global Peace Index that in California we spend on average $100,000 annually to incarcerate one youth. And then step two would be focusing on the solution. So here's where you can describe how legislation or a specific issue can contribute to solving the problem. So, for example, right now, there are programs that are proven to reduce gang involvement that cost an average of $250 per student per year. Giving peace a piece of the federal budget pie through legislation like the Youth Promise Act would ensure that we are investing in those successful programs and replicating them all around the country. The cost savings are staggering to consider. And then step three would be make it real. So bring your heart and experience into the conversation to create a personal connection. Sharing your personal story has a powerful impact. So here, what I did is actually I went onto the Peace Alliance website, and I went into the Faces of Peace, and I took Juan Pacheco's story, who is a former gang member. He was a member of Barrios Unidos, which is a very successful program that takes gang members or potential gang members and helps them choose life-affirming and nonviolent alternatives. And so, for example, if I were writing an article, I could say, as a woman, I want to walk down the street and feel safe. I would much rather that my tax dollars go to a program like Barrios Unidos, which helps people like Juan Pacheco, a former gang member, choose life-affirming behavior, positive goals, and supportive community. And you can see I also included a picture of Juan here. If you're submitting an editorial, you probably won't be able to include a picture. But bringing these issues down, because when we're talking about peace, it can seem very lofty and abstract. If we can bring it down to personal stories and personal connections, it makes it much more tangible. And anytime you have an opportunity to use a picture, I think is also encouraged, because it just creates so much more of a connection. And then the final step of this laser talk or laser peaceful writing would be to make a specific request or have a call to action about what you want the person to do. And for this, I'm channeling nonviolent communication. So the more doable, actionable, and time-bound, the better. So for example, you could write something like, "That's why I'm involved with the Peace Alliance. Will you share your email with us so that we can send you information about how you can participate in saving our young people and reducing government spending?" I think originally what was on the website was something like, "That's why I'm involved with the Peace Alliance. Will you come join us and help us save our young people and reduce government spending?" And so I changed it a little bit to make it more actionable. So I don't want them, what does it mean to join us? I want them to actually, I want to get their email address, or I want them to get onto the Peace Alliance website, or I want them to come to a press conference or whatever. So the more concrete the request and the more measurable it is, the better. And so here is Marshall Rosenberg, who is actually also one of our professors at the European Peace University. And in case you haven't caught it yet, that a lot in terms of peace journalism, a lot in terms of Johann Galtung's peace discourse and George Lakoff's nurture and parent frame overlay really nicely with nonviolent communication. And so if we go back, for example, to the 4 steps of the laser talk, the problem, the solution, making it real, and specific call to action, and look at, for those of you who are familiar with nonviolent communication, it's observation, feeling, needs, and request. So I would put the problem and the solution into observation, make it real by sharing your feelings and expressing your needs, and then have a specific, make a request. So there's kind of all these different angles that we can, or threads that we can bring into our writing when we're writing about peace. And so some of these best practices that I have here is pay attention to how you use language and frame your argument. And I'm realizing now that I didn't go into explaining how George Lakoff does this. So George Lakoff actually, excuse me, from a neurolinguistic perspective, sees that, or believes that when you use specific language, you're reinforcing specific neurocircuits in your brain. And so, for example, if you've spent your whole life speaking one language, all your neurons are basically formatted to listen and speak and respond in English. And you create pathways and they get more and more entrenched. Whereas if you speak several languages, you have multiple more pathways in different ways for information to get transmitted through your brain. So that you can talk about water, but you can also talk about agua, and you understand that water and agua are the same thing, but basically you have 2 pathways in your brain, even for that same concept. And so that these pathways activate the nurturant parent frame or the strict father frame. And his argument is, excuse me, his argument is that the Republican Party has been very good at selecting their words and their turns of phrase in order to reinforce the strict father frame. So, and they choose phrases, for example, like tax relief, to make it sound like lowering taxes is a relief, and increasing taxes, they will say, is a tax burden. And by framing the conversation that way, basically taxes are seen as a bad thing. And when they decrease, you're being relieved of them. And when they're increased, you're being burdened by them. Excuse me. And so if you try and debate on those terms, you're actually just constantly reinforcing those frames rather than changing the conversation. Excuse me. And talking about how taxes provide essential services and how they provide infrastructure and education and roads and all these benefits that a national or local government can provide. And so being very attentive to the language and how you use it, and that you're not falling into a strict father frame is important. And so my suggestion for our writing, at least, would be to always focus on collaboration and abundance over competition and scarcity. And then share the turns of phrase or the words or sentences that work well, that get good reactions. And definitely, I would say, like, we could start a little dictionary or a phrase bank in the Do Peace Writers Group, which Dan had mentioned at the beginning of the call. Excuse me. And I believe that the link is dopeace.us. And that way, the more that we keep using specific language and reinforce it and get it out into the public conversation, the better. And then finally, I would say I would encourage you all to focus on giving an authentic voice to the voiceless, whether it's your own personal voice or the voices of others. And you could do that like what I did in my example by going to the Faces of Peace resource on the Peace Alliance website. I've collected lots of stories on Peace is Sexy of individual peace builders and organizations, which I think are great examples of voices of peace. I think we have Britt Burlow on the call also. He's collected stories, also done interviews with, I think it was Compassionate Rebels is what he calls them. And so there's all these resources and collected stories that can help really personify these issues that we're trying to push forward and trying to address. And so I'm going to wrap it up here. If anyone has any questions, we'll take them. We can take them now, assuming we can figure out the technology. But then you're also welcome to email me. My email address is mariannehperez@gmail.com, and Marianne is spelled Marianne, H as in Helen, Perez, Perez, all one word together, @gmail.com. You can also check out my website, which is peaceissexy.net. Peace is Sexy is all one word also, so peaceisexy.net. And then you guys can also reach out to Dan Kahn, dan@peacealliance.org, and of course check out the Peace Alliance website, www.peacealliance.org. So I hope we still have some people with us, and I hope that we can take some questions. Let me see if I can switch over to if there's anyone on the phone who would like to ask a question, you're welcome to. You may have to unmute yourselves because I think everybody's muted now. And Dan, maybe you can give instructions on how to unmute.
Sure. You can unmute yourself if you're muted on the phone just by pressing *6. Meanwhile, I'll go ahead and actually offer a first question. Can you hear me okay, Marianne?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great. Thanks for that, by the way. That was a lot of great information with some great historical and philosophical foundation and also some practical suggestions. So it's a lot condensed into a short space. So what I want to ask, maybe you can sort of brainstorm about this. We encourage folks to write letters to the editor using a very similar format to what you described. What's the problem and what's the solution, inform about the issue, and have a call to action.
Dan, it
and
seems
also
like
work,
you
to
cut
work
out.
on
I can't hear
op-ed
you
pieces.
anymore.
Oh,
There we
how
go.
about now? Okay.
Yep.
And
so you said you were encouraging people to write letters to the editor using a very similar format.
yes, and also op-ed pieces. Like my question is around when people are communicating with editors of newspapers, right? So say I send in my op-ed, and then I call the editor, and I'm building a relationship with this editor over time, maybe over months. I've sent a few op-eds. How am I trying to help this editor to understand more of a peace journalism frame of mind than sort of the old school war and violence oriented journalism frame of mind? Is there a way that I can, in my communications with him, I guess partly it's what I write, but is there anything about how I approach him that would help me to guide the Baltimore Sun or the LA Times, whoever I'm talking to help me to move them in that direction?
Right. It's interesting. I hadn't thought about that question particularly, but I would say probably do the same thing in terms of what the Peace Alliance trains for how to approach members of Congress, right? And so when you're members of Congress or your city council members or whoever you're coming in to bring pie to, but I think one of the early Peace Alliance conferences that I went to in DC, the Peace Alliance conference was maybe like the week after some other peace conference where they were lobbying, maybe United for Peace and Justice or something like that. And so the previous peace group had stormed into their members of Congress's office and yelled at them and insulted them and said, how dare you support the war in Iraq, and how dare you do this, and you're screwing our country and you're screwing our children's futures, and we hate you, we can't stand you, and we're not going to vote for you again. And then the Peace Alliance citizen lobbyists come in a week later, and the Congress people are all on edge already because they're like, oh, there's more crazy peace people coming in. and I remember my group specifically, because we had Joe Allegro, who always was like, oh, we should bring cookies. And so we come in with a box of cookies, and we're talking to the member of Congress, and we're asking him about his kids and what his needs are and what's going on in his constituency, and opening up a conversation. And then he asks us what we're interested in, and we're able to connect, we're also concerned about safety, and we're also concerned about our children's future and all these things. And then that just makes it easier to open up a conversation about why we believe in this, or why we'd like the member of Congress to sign on to this piece of legislation. So I would say we can have a similar approach with journalists and with editors, in terms of, anytime you're on the phone, live your message, and walk the walk and talk the talk. And if you need some help with nonviolent communication training, I'm sure Dan can you can connect people to some of that. And so just in your everyday communications, practice that, and don't send an angry email to an editor. Oh, I sent you my editorial like 3 weeks ago. What's going on? I'm getting really annoyed because you haven't answered me. I would say just stay firm and polite, and use your practice your empathy. And oh, I understand that you weren't able to publish my editorial that I sent you 3 weeks ago. I'm wondering if you could give me some feedback about why it wasn't published. Did did it not meet the paper's criteria, or was it not relevant? Just so that the next time I submit an op-ed, I can target it more to your needs, because I would like to provide content for you that is going to be interesting and relevant to your readers.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, I didn't have an answer in mind. That was really an honest question, and that's a wonderful answer. Just focus, be the message. Yeah, thanks. So folks who are on the call on the phone line, again, if you're muted with your own phone, you can just unmute yourself. If you're muted through the call line technology, you can press *6 to unmute yourself. Are there any questions on the call line?
And I just want to add that while we're waiting for people to unmute themselves on the call line, you can also, for those of you who are in the group chat, although I think it might just be Dan and myself, you can type your questions here, and I'll put that in here. And for those of you who are joining on YouTube, you can put your questions in the YouTube comments, which would appear under where Dan has written, "Hi, can you see this?" about an hour ago. So, is there anyone on the phone that would like to? Yes, I can hear you. Who is this? Oh. Thank you. Please. Mm-hmm. 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 Right. So that's a great question. Thank you. So a couple points. So first of all, this laser talk thing. So these laser talk the talks are laser talks are meant to be for 2 to 3 minute presentations. So it's really just getting straight to the point. If you're kind of an elevator pitch type of thing, and so obviously if you have more time or more space, you can add in more things and develop ideas and go into depth on many things. And certainly I would consider that in your discussion of the problem that yes, you could include an acknowledgement of the other person's perspective, or the other party's perspective, and I'm trying to think of how to do this. So I would do it in an NVC kind of way for two reasons. One, to connect with their needs and acknowledging their feelings, but also bearing in mind George Lakoff's kind of framework idea, that you want to acknowledge them, but you don't want to reinforce their ideas. And so if you're talking about increasing spending for peace building, for example, that you don't want that to come across as increasing government spending or increasing or that would translate to higher taxes for this person that you're talking to, that you're trying to convey your message to, and that instead you want to address that concern. And so so you could say, by investing in peace building programs, you're actually saving money, both in the short term and in the long term. And so maybe you want to get to that point sooner or more quickly than you would otherwise. And so trying to think. Yeah, and I think part of it is just being really aware. I don't have you read George Lakoff and Don't Think of an Elephant? Okay. I definitely recommend it, and it's actually a tiny little book. It's like 80 pages or something like that. And so basically, just to give you a little bit more of context for it, it's like if you say to someone, "Don't think of an elephant," the first thing that's going to pop into their mind is an elephant. And so if you say, "Well, don't think of a Department of Peace as being expensive. Instead, think of it as tax, as saving your money." Like already, just by putting this kind of negative idea in their head, you're shooting yourself in the foot, because they're going to be thinking of it as a government expense and higher taxes and everything. And so kind of I would address their concern in the positive, if that makes sense. And so I'm trying to think. I don't know if you have a specific example or a specific question that might be easier, or a specific situation that might be easier to tackle, or we could brainstorm. Okay. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And again, anytime you can use NVC in terms of connecting it to feelings and needs, and taking a guess at what their needs are, what their feelings are about the issue, and engaging that positively, I think is also good. That, that requires some art in being able to do that in a piece of writing, but it's certainly something we can all strive for. Are there any other questions?
Here's another one for you.
Sure.
You don't have to. I'll shift my technology. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Okay. So we've been talking a little bit about letters to the editor and also about op-ed pieces. What about actually getting articles published? Can people who are not journalists by trade, can they approach a newspaper and say, hey, I've got a press release, or I've got a short article. Can I talk to somebody about getting this published? Do you have some familiarity with people just they have an event going on, then they want it to be newsworthy, not just an opinion piece, but actually a reporting of something that happened. What would you say about that?
Right. So there's lots of different ways to get into the press. One thing that I will say is that with the internet now, it's a lot easier to get your message out. And so you can, like a lot of newspapers and radio stations and news outlets will have websites. And many of them actually even have blog, kind of a blog section on it where a member of the public can submit and have a blog post on their website. And kind of the most prestigious one of those is the Huffington Post. So that would be one way to write your article and have it appear on the blog of whatever news organization you would like it to appear on. And usually what happens is if the news organization likes it, they will kind of promote it and say, here are the latest articles from our blog, and put it up on their front page or whatever, so it gets more visibility. So that's one way to do it. Another way is, like what I think you were alluding to, is if you're having an event so there's two things you can do. You can have an event and just send out a press release and invite media to come to your event. So the more interesting the event, the more likely the media is to come to it. So for example, in New Yorkers for Department of Peace, we've done, what did we do? We've done lobbying for getting a city council resolution passed in support of a Department of Peace. And so we held a press conference the day that the city council resolution was being presented to the city council. And so we held a press conference on the front steps of the New York City Hall. And actually, just by chance, there happened to be a city council member that was walking by and saw the press conference going on and like heard enough of what we were saying that was like, oh, this is great. I'm going to vote for the city council resolution. And so he actually kind of co-opted our press conference. But it was great because then we actually had, I think we already had 2 city council members there that were speaking. And then we got the third one just who happened to be walking by. And then we got a little bit of coverage out of that. And then after that, we got, we ended up getting invited by a few other media channels to come in and talk about it, including I was on the Brian Lair Show, which is a big New York Public Radio talk show talking about the Department of Peace and things like that. So if you're having an event, you can hold a press conference in association with the event, or you can also just invite media to the event. So for example, if you're doing maybe like a fundraising concert, you can invite media, and usually what you would do is say, send out a press release, and there's probably templates for press releases on the website. And there definitely are, I remember seeing them. But add a line that says, we have press passes available for free, please contact us. And then, and if it's a good concert and somebody in some news organization wants to go, and the way that they're going to go is if they are going to get it for free, is if they end up writing a story, they'll probably be happy to do that too. So I would definitely say any kind of fundraisers or anything, any event that's going on in a community, definitely write a press release. If appropriate, you can have a press conference that goes with it. There's some tips on the website also in terms of thinking about when you have your press releases go out and when you hold your press conferences, because you want to make sure you catch the news cycle. So don't hold a press conference, for example, on a Friday afternoon for an issue that's burning, because nothing's going to get done on the weekend, and you'll be lucky if anyone remembers, or any of the journalists remember, your event by the time Monday comes around, or if there haven't been more events that have superseded whatever it was. So so usually in the morning, usually earlier in the week are better times to hold press conferences. But definitely, find out if your community paper, for example, only comes out once a week. Make sure you know when the deadline is and when they have to get all their articles in, so you have enough time for them to read your press release and do what they need to do and get their story together for their upcoming issue. Did that answer your question, Dan?
Yes, thank you.
Sure.
I have one idea I might want to add on to that. That was a bunch of great suggestions, and there's one more that I think I want to tack on, which is if you have your local paper, whatever paper you want to maybe get published in, you might look for the reporter who's covering some issue that is like what you're doing.
Right.
Maybe there's a reporter that seems to be writing about youth violence or about international potentially positive diplomatic happenings. If you think you might have a friendly reporter, you can contact them directly, right, and just feed them information.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great point. And certainly probably try and show up at events where they show up, and try and grab their business card. Like, I know a couple of times when I lived in New York, I was going to events down at the UN that were like the launch of the Global Peace Index, and when there were some like UN Security Council resolutions that the Global Peace Alliance was promoting and stuff like that, and there was a great opportunity to meet reporters who were obviously covering and interested in those types of issues. And so I would collect their cards and then kind of follow up with them. And different reporters had different angles or different beats that they were approaching. So I remember one actually had just switched over to the education. And so kind of feed her information about how peace building measures could be incorporated into schools and how it would help improve education and stuff like that. And actually, it also another way to get into the news is to kind of, you can pull stunts. So a friend of mine works for a drug policy institute, and does research on
I think I need to hide the participants.
Drug laws and
it's fine, right?
Incarceration related to drugs.
Hide the participants. Because presumably, as more
so
people join,
he just told me the story actually, that what they wanted to do
was
to take out, or what his director wanted to do, the organization's director wanted to do, was to take out a $50,000 ad in the New York Times last week, because apparently, along with all the UN,
no one's going to be wearing any propaganda.
Global climate change. There was a portion of those meetings that was dedicated also to international drug laws and drug policy. And so, this Drug Policy Institute wanted to take out an ad in the New York Times.
Just out of curiosity, now I'm sharing my screen.
We're going to be in town at the UN
on your
to basically lay out their position and explain why they believe they should sign on to whatever resolution was being presented.
Right.
So another way to get into
see all this other stuff around it, like the Google Hangout stuff.
Buy your way, have a paid advertising or an advertorial, or buy publicity, or buy, create a expensive PSA,
so,
kind of get in that way. if you don't have the funds to do that, or
And
if you
then
want to
if
do
I
it
switch
either
over
way.
to here,
So you could take a
Oops.
cue from what the Drug Policy Institute
you
did.
just see
Was so instead of spending
like the PowerPoint,
$50,000,
basically.
what they decided to do instead was to hire a bunch of actors, which they dressed up in Prohibition era
What is it, your friend
costumes,
or my friend?
because their position is that that basically, like right now,
That's fine, because
the U.S.
I know
has
from
an
brain.
attitude of prohibition around drugs, which is similar to what it was with
Or
alcohol in the
okay.
1910s and teens and 20s.
Uh,
And so they got all these actors dressed up in Prohibition era costumes and handed out the kind of the proclamation or
is that
whatever the text was that they would have printed in their advertorial to all the delegates. And because of this, they actually ended up getting publicity and getting into the news, because there's like all these people dressed up in turn of the century costumes, and kind of like acting a little silly, with all these UN delegates in their stuffy suits and everything. And then, which then opened up a door for, okay, well, why are you doing this? What's your position? What is this about? And so in that way, they were able to get interviewed and get their message across for much cheaper than it would have been to buy the advertising space. And I would argue that it actually is almost a little bit more legitimate, at least from a reader's point of view, because it's a story that's being written about them. And so there's a reporter who is getting information about them, rather than being perceived as a reader. I see their advertisement and I see, oh, okay, well, they paid for this. Of course, they can put whatever the message they want. If I see a reporter reporting on it, I assume that the reporter has done research and is collecting information from across the spectrum and everything. So whether or not that's true is a different story. But at least as a reader, that's what my assumption is.
That's great. That really gives me the impression, and hopefully gives other folks the impression, that there basically are many channels to get to the media. There are all kinds of creative opportunities, right?
Right. So next year, don't just deliver pies, but dress up as pies. So do we have any other questions? I'm trying to see if there's anything on any of the chats or channels here. Oh, let's see. Kim Schwarzkopf, what's happening? So it looks like Kim had some technical difficulties. But Kim, did you have a question for us?
Hello, hello. Can you hear me?
A private message from Kim. I think she was on a different link. There she is.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, if there are no other questions, or Dan, did you have another question?
No, I don't think so. I so appreciate that you're on the writers group. So just to let folks know, if they want to contact you, you gave a couple of email addresses, and also people can be in conversation with you by means of the writers team on, as you mentioned, dopeace.us, the writers team. So just put that out there for folks who are listening to the recording as well. That's some place where we can all connect about opportunities for getting peace-building journalism moving in the direction that we want it. Was there more that you want to add or ask?
No, I was just going to say, first of all, I want to apologize if there were any technical difficulties. I'm guessing that Kim probably is not the only one that had some technical issues. But that I hope if we were able to do this all properly, that this has all been recorded, and it should be up on the YouTube channel, the full recording, and I think I'm going to edit out the first 15 minutes, which were Dan and I talking about technical issues. And so hopefully we can get that up tomorrow, and I'm hoping I'll have to take a look at it, that it had all the slides that went through on the YouTube recording. But otherwise, Dan can also share the PowerPoint with all of you, or you can email me and I can send it directly. Again, my email is Marianne H. Perez, MarianneHperez @gmail.com. And if anyone's interested in receiving my master's thesis, I'm also happy to share that with you. Although you could probably Google it and find it on your own. Moving mainstream media towards a culture of peace. Moving mainstream media towards a culture of peace. Marianne Perez. You should be able to find it. So I think that about wraps everything up.
Great. Well, thank you so much again for joining us. I know I'd be very interested in seeing your master's thesis, and if there's a way we can share that by way of the writers team page, that may be a link to it, that could be neat. And thank you so much for joining us. This has been an education and also an inspiration. You really reminded me about some of the roots of our movement back in 05, 06, 07, and the combination of the way that we communicate and the things that we talk about in our organization and our practice. So I really appreciate you just sort of bringing all that together in this great package. And hopefully it'll be useful for many folks in the future. So I wish you well.
Thank you, Dan. And actually, just one last announcement also, that if there's anyone that's interested in if we have enough people that are interested in a more in-depth peace journalism training, I know I kind of covered a lot in a very short amount of time, but that is certainly something that I'm open to developing, and we can set it up in whatever way is most useful to whoever wants to participate. But it would definitely be virtual, as I'll likely be in Mozambique. But we can do it with different types of technology. And so if that's something you're interested in, let Dan and or myself know, and we can work it out.
All right, that sounds great. That sounds great to me, and I bet other people would be interested as well.
Great, thank you.
All right, thank you. Good night to you, and good night everybody else.
Have a good night, everyone. Bye.
Bye.